Welcome to A Voice on Main Street. I'm Gary Sutton. And the voices on Main Street want our community to be very, very safe, proactively and preventatively, as well as dealing with the various kinds of crimes that we have in our community. One person that's doing a lot of that is Jamie Noerpel, who's with the York County Safety Collaborative, and she is pulling together and connecting people all over the community here in York, especially in light of the UPMC tragedy a few weeks ago with Officer Duarte, in trying to make sure we have a safer community. And she is a voice on Main Street here with me today on the Gary Sutton, A Voice on Main Street. Good morning, Jamie. How are you?
Good morning, Gary. Thanks for having me.
Well,
I'm great.
It's great to have you. And you and I talk every week on my show, The Gary Sutton Show on WOYK. But I first heard you about 5-6 weeks ago. You did a 2-hour presentation, and I was captivated. I didn't know that there was anything like the York County Safety Collab. And there's not a whole lot like it around the state of Pennsylvania. You're kind of unique in a lot of ways. But I wanted people to hear a little bit this morning about what's being done, especially in light of the UPMC tragedy, the shooting of Officer Duarte, the injury of other people, the death of the person who was committing the crimes. And, we are looking at that now, and I think people are a little bit more concerned about what are we doing about those kinds of people in the community. Talk a little bit about how you got started with the York County Safety Collab.
Sure. The York County Safety Collab started about 3 years ago. It's a coalition of law enforcement, nonprofits, clergy, business leaders, and we try to get outside the silos. York County is not unique in that we have siloing. And so how can we break down those barriers so we can coordinate efforts and work better together? So the coalition that we have focuses mostly on the 17 police departments and the DA's office and the sheriff's office, going after shared resources, whether that is for joint trainings. Because I told you at one time in one of our podcasts, if you drive from the West York Walmart to the East York Walmart, you can go through 4 different jurisdictions. And each one polices a little differently. Some of our are accredited, some are not. Some have policies, their use of force, for example, changes. And so we're trying to create some type of uniformity and have the chiefs kind of work together.
We've seen a lot change in terms of policing over the years. We go back to the George Floyd killing in Minnesota. We go back to the Freddie Gray situation in Baltimore. We go back to a lot of those kind of things we see over the years. A racial component got in there as well. And people are looking at policing and saying, do we trust the police department? We saw an effort to defund the police for a period of time there. That's kind of going in the other direction now. But you have to deal with a lot of that and talking to people. And I know one of the places that you started was with the idea of getting the ministers here in some of the black communities here in New York together with the police departments. And what came out of that was kind of an interesting base from which to really start the Safety Collab.
And that is the birth of the Safety Collabs. It started back, like you said, when Freddie Gray was murdered back in 2015. There were riots around the entire country, right? And even down to Baltimore. And so with our racial past, when we look at the race riots that we had here in 1969, York leaders were concerned that we were a tinderbox and that violence was going to eventually come up to York County. So the Black Ministers Association, led by Pastor Bill Kearney and Aaron Anderson, was a dear friend. They said, we need to get all the police chiefs, police in general, in a room and talk about what's happening so we can divert any type of violence here. And that first meeting was very tense. Pastor Bill Kearney said that you could split the tension with a knife. He said all the clergy sat on one side, the chiefs sat on the other. They thought like an ambush awaited them. They weren't sure what to expect. They'd never been called to a town hall meeting. But clergy were very intentional about not including the media. There weren't supposed to be any politicians. And so it started out with Pastor Ramona Kynard getting up and expressing some concern about her black son as he drove through the countryside. And she was not concerned about the cows, right? She was concerned about the Confederate flags. Right. And so how the police responded changed everything. They could have went up and went into an explanation, defended their actions, but they didn't. Instead, they apologized and they had empathy and remorse. And they said, I'm so sorry that you're feeling unsafe in my community. I can't believe this is happening right here. And so it was another 3 hours of trust and transparency, then building those relationships. And then after the meeting ended, they said, we can't stop here. Let's keep having this meeting. So they've been meeting every month. They take a little hiatus in the summer, but we have our next meeting coming up next week. And I'll tell you, after the UPMC shooting, that first meeting that we had 5 police chiefs show up, as well as another 25 clergy. The room was packed, and it was a moment where I saw police chiefs be vulnerable in a way that you would not expect of our police. They're supposed to be tough, right? Run towards the danger. But in that room, they felt safe. They felt comfortable. They opened up. They talked about the trauma that they witnessed, that their people witnessed, what they're trying to do to recover from it. Because I'll tell you that event, some people, everyone handles trauma differently, but there are some people in York County that are still, devastated by this.
I want to come back to what Pastor Kynard said about her son, because she was also concerned, I believe I'm correct on this, that he was getting pulled over on a regular basis because of his color. And of course, that's the kind of thing we read about where it happened out there somewhere in the United States or someplace else. And all of a sudden she said, no, it's happening here in one of the venues where police are covering. And when the police found that out, they went, wait a second, that's not supposed to be happening here. And that's where you heard the apology along with some of the other things there. Again, the police do a great job in our area, but they said, if that's happening at all, we don't want that happening to our citizens, no matter what color they are, and especially if they're African American. When you talk about the hurting out of the UPMC event a few weeks ago, and obviously the killing of Officer Duarte is still very fresh in our minds, the injuring of other people there, doctors, nurses, custodians, the death of the guy involved. One of the things I know you're trying to do is to not let people go through the cracks. You're trying to close up those floorboards so there's no room. And yet at the same time, we know that there's always going to be someone who somehow slips through. How do we deal with that? How do we get at that right now? What are some of the things you're trying to do to close down those cracks right now? And if not eliminate it, at least come very, very close to identifying those people ahead of time.
So at the Safety Collab, we are a collaborative. We serve as the backbone. We are a convener. And so what we try to do is just align action, right? So for example, I've been working with UPMC and they said, hey, one thing that would mean a lot is if the people affected had notes, support from the community that just said, hey, we're thinking about you. So thanks to generous donors in the community, they said, we want to support. We were able to put together these baskets. And in the baskets had everything from the book, The Body Keeps the Score. If you've never read it, it's great. It's about trauma and how it latches on to our physical being. Right. But it also included massage, to just go a voucher to get a massage, soap from a local soap company, and also cards, about a dozen cards in each one that just said, hey, we're thinking about you. So we dropped them off at UPMC, the 38 baskets, but then we also made sure we gave it to Andrew Duarte's mother, to the police chief in West York, and the lieutenant and the officer that was involved, and all the officers as well that were directly wounded because of it. We also, though, because of Explore York, they were able to give us a few bags to drop off to every officer that was involved. So every police chief that told me, like, hey, I have 10 people that were involved, I have 20 people that were involved, we dropped off those baskets. And I know it doesn't seem like a lot, just small baskets, right. But it's one little thing that we're doing to try to show our support. But we also, those cards, they're on display within the police departments. And the idea is when the police walk past that table, they see that they are not alone, that the community does support them. Because like you said, there's some rhetoric out there that's anti-police. And so we're trying to show them that they're just trying to do their job. What can we do to try to support them?
You have groups, I know the Thames group is one of them, that gets out there and works really hard on identifying people before they get to that point, where you actually have people on the radar. Talk about that a little bit, because I think a lot of people in our community here on Main Street don't really know what that's all about, and yet I think they'd have a little bit better feeling if they knew that there are eyes on people like that, and trying not only just to identify them, but also maybe help them before they get to that moment that we saw the other week.
Yeah, so the man that went into UPMC, that violence was impulsive, it was impromptu, and it was not planned. Sometimes events like that are just going to happen, and evil exists, and you can't stop everything from happening. Now, with that said, York County is not a stranger to school shootings. Right. We have Dr. Segro back in 2003. We've got the machete attack in 2001 down in North Hopewell. We have not had an attack since, and it's largely because of the prevention efforts that are happening, including the threat assessment and mitigation team. This is housed within the county. This is a county initiative. And how it started was a couple of years ago, the FBI reached out to the county, and they said, we're concerned about this young person that's in York County who is looking up disturbing things online. I've seen the search results, and from about 3 a.m. to 6 a.m., it is just search after search of what does chemical gas do to you? Like how do you build a bomb? Things like that. So that triggered the FBI. And the FBI came in and said, we need to assemble a team to intervene and stop this kid from blowing up a school. This child had already written a manifesto. They had already developed a map of the school. They were purchasing items to assemble a bomb. And York County at first responded with, like, what team? we don't have the preparation for this. So thankfully, the county responded and they set up this threat assessment and mitigation team. And what it is a multidisciplinary group, everyone from law enforcement, probation, mental health services. I play a role in there as a community connector. Right now, there are about 10 people on that list, 8 that are active. Most of them are children. And these are children who don't feel like they belong. They don't fit in. They feel ostracized. Usually, I should say, every case so far in York County, they have a history of trauma.
When you talk about these kids, so what's the process? We talk about what we're doing. What's the process in terms of how you go about it? And by the way, I might mention that the process for just one evaluation here is something around $4,000. Am I correct on that?
Yes.
And again, vastly needed resources here in being able to identify not just one of these kids, but all these kind of kids that come up. But when you go into that process, and you talk about connectivity a lot, you connect a lot of people together. Who all is involved in that? What do they do, and how do they determine what the next step is, whether it's being referred to police, whether it's being referred for more counseling, maybe some other kind of activities in between? Talk a little bit about that, if you would.
So once a referral comes in, it can either be from the FBI because of their tools that can predict things like that, but then also from their schools. It's because we have teachers who notice, I have a child who is becoming fascinated with Hitler or with ISIS. They're drawing pictures of people being impaled in our class, right? And I was a teacher for 10 years. You were an educator, and you just had the spidey sense tingle every now and then of something's not quite right. So thankfully, because of parents and educators and social workers, because they notice these changes, they alert the proper people in their school, whether that's the principal or whatever the school's chain of command is. And if they decide that it is worthy of further intervention, they reach out to the TAMS team through MHIDD. Once they get the referral, the TAMS team assembles within 24 hours, and they assess the level of threat. Some of them are as small as a 2 or 3
Right.
out of a scale of 10, which is, all right, we need to monitor this person. We need to do visits to their house. We need to talk to their teachers and begin assembling a larger view of the whole context, right? Like, does their family support them? Are they in sports? Are they not in sports? What are their hobbies? What is their past trauma? But then if they're more of a 8, 9, or 10 on the severity list, they're what's called 302, and that's involuntary commitment. And that is that they have been deemed unsafe for themselves or for others. And so
Right.
they are hospitalized. Now, the scary thing is that law enforcement usually can't do anything because they haven't committed a crime. Researching
Right.
these things and becoming fascinated with Hitler is not a crime. And that's why it takes the community to all work together to figure out how can we divert this young person off this pathway to violence.
Now, you have some proactive ways you do that with some of these people, again, depending on where they come up with the threat assessment risk scale, so to speak. You say like a 2 or 3. Okay, we're keeping an eye on them. But then do you also start to work with them on maybe moving them in other directions so they get away from that direction they appear to be on in terms of maybe causing damage down the line?
Oh, and this is why social services in York County is so important. Because what we find is, these kids, like I told you, they don't feel like they belong. And so it's usually not a sports program that's going to solve it.
Right.
A lot of it is the humanities, the arts. So for example, we have, there's a young person who is obsessed with, they found neo-Nazis as their group, right? And so, because what happens is you have these predators online who are looking for vulnerable children and through propaganda indoctrinate them into their hate. And that it's a toxic environment, but if you don't belong, and there are entire discords online devoted to the Columbine shooters, right? Martyrizing them, heroizing them. And so these kids join these groups and they feel like they belong and they're part of the group. And so they start planting ideas in their head. And so children like this don't just snap, right? And so that's the difference between the PMC shooting is totally different from what the TAMS team looks at. They don't just decide one day that they're just going to go shoot up the school. They test their grit first. So they might start kicking the family dog. They might start drowning a cat in a tub. Sorry, Gray, this is intense this morning.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Yeah.
you're asking for it. But these are some, and this is, again, I want to stress that this is happening in York County.
Right.
We have children who are designing their own neo-Nazi uniforms, right? And so social services, connecting them with, okay, so you are interested in this music that is like white supremacy. You like music, you just happen to found this niche. What other musicians can we connect you with? Or we had a young person who is really interested in the military, but also showed all these signs that we're thinking, oh, there's no way that you're going to be in the military. We're probably not going to trust you with a gun. Let's connect them with a veterans group where they can sit down and talk with veterans who have been to war, that can talk about it and be more of a pro-social option, of a mentor that they can go to. So social services, having adults in their life that care about them, because a lot of these kids, and I say kids, but 3 of them are adults, but most of them are underage.
Right.
Most of them don't have parents to go home to. I mean, I am very privileged in that I always had a mom that had food in the fridge and I could wash my clothes in the washing machine. A lot of these kids don't. They go home to empty cupboards, parents that are absentee, and that is, again, this part of trauma neglect. Because everyone thinks trauma can be extreme, which in a lot of cases it is, but also just neglect and not having that support system, or even being bullied in school. We see that as well.
And that's a daily reinforcement of the negativity that they're feeling when people aren't there to help them. And maybe what they have is their smart device in front of them, and that's maybe parenting them at that point too, and that's a real problem. What are some of the other aspects of the York County Safety Collab that people ought to be aware of? You are very unique. I mean, there's not a lot of you here in Pennsylvania, which is sad to me. Are you getting people who are kind of tuning in and saying, what are you guys doing? Maybe it's something unique. Maybe something we can get going here in other parts of Pennsylvania where we can help other people in the community that have the same, very similar kind of problems.
Yeah, so how we were formed was so organically with this chiefs and clergy meeting, and then after them meeting for months, they said, what now can we do with this? Let's now bring someone on to then take this relationship to the next level. But it was also because the state, through a grant, through PCCD, which stands for Pennsylvania Commission on Crime and Delinquency, they started 2.5 years ago a pilot grant program called the CCVI grant, and that's what funds my position. There are 4 other recipients of this grant. So efforts like this of convening people, of being that backbone of public safety efforts, is also happening in Pittsburgh, in Philly, and then in York.
Wow.
Right?
Very limited number then.
It is, and it was just a pilot program for the state to see if it would work or not. And they trusted us to go out there and look at the community and then go back to them and ask them for funding to divert that funding through a conduit through mostly grassroots startup nonprofits.
Now, I've got to ask you a question. Pilot sounds to me like not permanent. That's what it sounds like to me. Am I hearing it correctly? It's not permanent. We need to get some. Where are we at right now with making it permanent?
So a lot of grants are pilot programs that the state or federal government say we want to launch this initiative.
Right.
And then for sustainability, it is up to local foundations and local philanthropists to then support it after that grant runs out. That grant is set to expire in August. And so my husband thought I was crazy. You know, I left a union position as a teacher with my summers off to now a grant-funded position. But man, if you haven't realized, I'm passionate about this. This is phenomenal, the work that's happening. So we are looking to local foundations, local supporters to continue the support. We have already had a lot of support with the community foundation. Stewart and Tate has also been very, very helpful. But if there are any other funders out there that could meet with us and talk about the backbone support, I would, of course, welcome that meeting.
You know, the number one thing of government is to keep us secure. You are doing a lot to keep us secure, along with the people that are working with you. It seems to me, and this is where we get into, and maybe I'm looking at this incorrectly, but I'll be controversial for a moment. Government mandates. So many times the government comes out and says, okay, here, we're giving you this money, and then in 2 or 3 years, or in the space of a year, you could do it on your own. Okay, you're not equipped to do it on your own yet. You've now got to be creative in terms of going out and getting other foundations and other private entities to get involved here. Isn't it the government's job through the people, you know, their tax dollars going in there to try to keep the community safe? Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I also think that this is a local issue and is a local problem as well.
Fair enough.
So while I do think that I would, of course, welcome support from the government, I'm also hoping that locally we can figure out how to support this, whether that's the county or whatever. Yeah.
I know you talk a lot about partnerships, and it seems like here's one where the government and the people could have a partnership through the various foundations, through the various private entities and resources that we have. But that's for another day. Final thoughts on just other parts of the collaborative that are really, really important to what you do, because I look at it as you're putting this together, and I've heard you do it a couple of times. It's like a big jigsaw puzzle that has all these pieces that all have to fit to see what the picture of safety looks like at the end of the day. Your thoughts?
I think one of the things that I'm most excited about is our community safety summits. We started hosting them back in September of 2024. And the idea is I'm trying to bring everyone to the table to come up with a community safety plan. Right now, there are still people committing crimes, and of course, we're never going to get rid of it completely. But if we can provide the supports, we can try to lower crime, because crime costs our community. It costs us in lost productivity. It costs us in judicial expenses. An average murder in New York County costs us $13 million.
Wow.
That's in judicial fees, but then, like I said, also paying out to the victims and the overtime for police. I mean, it's just an entirely cumbersome process. Last year, thankfully, there were only 12 homicides in New York County, but still 12 homicides times 13 million is very, very expensive. And Tim Barker at a recent presentation that we gave, who is now the DA, said that when a community is labeled as being dangerous, we do not then see businesses that want to open here. We don't see future leaders that want to choose to make York County their home. And so by making York County safer for everyone, it doesn't just improve the health and wellness, but also the economic benefits of being a healthier community. I mean, look at Hershey, Pennsylvania. Right, Hershey, Pennsylvania has some of the lowest crime rates.
Right.
And look how they also have a huge chocolate factory to support and whatnot. But I think that having all of us be able to work together towards this thing is just powerful.
You know, it's amazing when you lay it out and you say how much it costs for crime and all the tentacles that it has and all the domino kind of effects that go on there. The idea that people are not going to pay for hotels to come here and visit if they think it's a crime-ridden city or county. People are not going to go to places like the baseball stadium. People are not going to go to places like the theaters, the restaurants. We are seeing people go those now, which I think is a testament maybe to not only what you're doing, but what the community is doing at large, and of course, what we're doing downtown. But it is amazing when you think about just the whole domino effect there, and that's why we need a safe community. That's why we need to be able to feel good about coming downtown. That's why we need to be able to feel good when we go to the parking garages or we go to the restaurants or wherever we might go. It's a really big point that you bring up there, Jamie.
Yeah. And so another initiative of Logos Works Partners, which is my employer, the Safety Club, is just one initiative of this nonprofit.
Right.
Is they're also looking at the camera network. Thanks to Better York, a phenomenal local organization, they are looking at ways that we can have eyes on the streets, just cameras, because cameras document the truth, right? It is not bias. They show exactly the evidence. And so we're also looking at figuring out ways that we can have cameras in a way that doesn't become a surveillance state, that protects people's civil liberties. We're really thinking about the whole angle of this. Lancaster City did it well. But those are the types of things I think that will make people feel comfortable coming to the downtown.
And that's exactly what we want. People being comfortable living on the main street of York, on the main street of the county, and doing all those things. Where can people find out more information about York County Safety Club?
YorkCountySafetyClub.org. They can also go on our Facebook page, our Instagram. We have a podcast on YouTube and in Spotify called the Safer Together Chats. Thank you so much for having me on. This has been fantastic.
Jamie, thanks so much for joining us here. Another of the voices on Main Street that's getting it done. Believe me, Jamie's out there working all the time with all kinds of people, trying to pull people together, connect people in York so we have a safer community on the main streets of York. I'm Gary Sutton. Thanks for joining me today on Just a Voice on Main Street.